evolution hour because we have some visitors in the house, and so I don't want to make an enormous amount of noise, and the connection seems to be looking pretty good still at this time. So away we go. Behold on the screen our patrons. Thank you ever so much for sticking with the old RJ month after month to keep the thing running, and we are trying to fulfill the interest that you have on your end, as well as keeping up the projects at my end. So we will conclude the sharing of that exciting little material and get to the main events. As of course, the doing saga of replacing Darwin, Nathaniel Jensen's tome, looking at what sources he uses, and to what extent does he misrepresent those sources or fairly represent them. That we will have one source today, a 2014 paper on equid species. Jensen has an interesting thing to get into in this chapter. He asks, is it possible to have tens of thousands of new species in the 6,000 years since creation? And that's a shell game right there, because the 6,000 years creation would involve all the species in the fossil record and all the existing species. That's a little taller order than tens of thousands. But if he's only talking about analyses relating to living species, then that's a somewhat smaller number, but still not tens of thousands. It's way beyond that. And of course, he's dealing with would have to deal with organisms post-flood and include arthropods and others. But of course, he's pointedly not doing that. So he narrows it down back to our old friends, the horses. Now, earlier, he had made use of a paper that suggested there might be 5 to 6 million DNA variations in the various horse breeds. That's his first data point. The Orlando paper that came up in earlier episodes. Now he dangles a 2018 paper from Johnson from PNAS, so I'll be having the link up for that so everyone can follow up on it, from which it suggested there were about 10 to 28 million separating the various equid species, from which he concludes this, quote, in other words, with fewer DNA differences at their disposal, human breeders have created much more morphological variety on the farm that exists in the wild. If human breeders can do so much with so little genetic potential, and if much more genetic potential exists in the wild, then a natural substitute, in quotes, for humans is almost unnecessary. Natural processes needs to accomplish so little. Well, gosh, he's confused an awful lot here. Morphological variation with genetic variety and what genes are actually involved in any of it, of which it turns out the Johnson paper was discussing an awful lot. The various chromosome duplications and variations in the equid species and some of the genes that are involved and which genes are the most likely that are shifting around. And of course, it all was within a frame of horses developing over millions of years, not only 6,000 or actually only 4,300 coming off of the Ark. And worse, since he's 17, what about Ark Encounter? Because the created horse that's shown at the Ark Encounter is the fossil Deinohyppus, one of the transitional forms, not a horse that looks just like a horse of horse. Its name is Mr. Ed. And so there's an amazing amount of shell game going on. And you'll find with the Johnson paper that there's a lot of really neat details in there that doesn't make it even to his footnote, let alone the basic discussion of it. So that's that end of it. The other end of our show involves a 2022 post on CMI about a crocodile eats dinosaurs. Flood-buried crocodiles' last supper was a dinosaur. And this was an incredible laundry list of catastrophic burial. So there's a whole pile of additional stuff to go through You can see my little annotations and adjustments that I put on in there as I track down all of these things. Issue about how creationists view fun, and that if it died, it had to be catastrophic. No, that doesn't follow at all. And indeed, I recommend that anybody wanting to investigate all of this should go and see the various creationist posts on these various issues, and then look up the original science papers, which they usually riff off of one at a time, to see what's actually going on. And the point is that in order to sustain a catastrophic interpretation, they've got to show that the deposit was in fact catastrophic, that it would have the characteristics, the various materials and rock sizes and others that would be very distinctive if there had been rapid flood movement at this time, just in the same way that we can see the dynamics of catastrophic flood in the Missoula floods here. They make very distinctive things. When if the water slows down at any point, it drops rocks and stuff in very distinctive ways. All of that would be happening theoretically in this big slosh. But they can't simply assume that's the case. And of course, some of these things would have, the deposits would be related to volcanic ash. Other deposits would be related to sand dunes in desert environments. So trying to figure out all of this stuff as if it was a catch-all creationist model is just not going to cut it. Today, I was also spending a thing that's going to probably end up as a mention in Volume 2 of Rocks Were There. In relation to Mark Armitage and his, if you're familiar with young Earth creationism and the soft tissue issue, you'll recognize Mark Armitage's name. That's not surprising. Armitage had a bit of a creationist set of posts prior to all of the soft tissue stuff. And one of them, back from 2009, that I've been investigating has to do with the claims that creationists are really inventive in discerning new things about nature that weren't there before. And he happens to be talking about mosses, bryophytes, and a particular feature of these peristomes in the bryophytes. And now I'm starting to dive into the technical papers he's cited, which is not a huge number, and most of them are not terribly recent. Even, a lot of its stuff is old 19th century stuff. But also finding out what he's leaving out. And it's looking like there was quite a technical literature on these peristomes and even about their evolution that he could have known about, but somehow managed to miss and cite. I'll eventually be looking into how much of it's quote mining and how much of it is misrepresentation. And plus, this is from 2009. It's 13 years later, kids. So have they done anything on that since? Has Armitage done anything on it since? As far as I can tell, no. It was just this, wow, created. And then that's the end of it. So that's a sense of what's going on. I'm not seeing any chats popping up in here, so it's very possible that nobody is in the chat room. Hard to say. I'll give you a bit of, I'll keep running on here because we've only 8 minutes in and the signal's looking like it's really quite nice. So we're going to enjoy ourselves, even though we'll have to keep our voice down a little bit and handle it as best we can. I'm finishing up sorting out various sidebar material on the Big Slosh chapter, Tales of the Flood, for the new Volume 2. And also getting the material tidied up for the subject matter that's going to be in the other chapter that I'm doing the main work on, which is the cosmology chapter. And there we will be discussing so many things, from the second law argument that was such a staple creationism and has kind of fallen by the wayside, relentless opposition to the Big Bang, the weird pseudo cosmologies that are generated by varieties of creationists, Lyle and Humphreys and others, none of which have stood the test of time within their own creationist framework. They're not getting much headway there. Issues about how galaxies form and how stars form and how elements form in stars, how solar systems form, how planetary things develop, how our planet developed, why we have the moon that we do, why the planets are the way they are, what the features of they are, how old are Saturn rings, and all of that how much lunar dust is there, some of those little canards. And then as that brings in broader areas, the Hovind theory, which is basically warmed over ice canopy, and the polonium halo issue, and quite a lot else is going to go in that chapter. So I'm getting all of this stuff sorted out and prepped up for a tour. Twinkle, twinkle, little stars, it is called. So I'm still not getting any chat overlay on there. I may call that to a halt then, so that people, when the thing posts up, then I'll be able to put the links and that to it. It's such a delightful time to be doing such research, because in this case of researching Armitage stuff, virtually all of the technical papers that he alludes to are available to we old scholar here. So I'm going to be able to see the primary source material, and if he's pulling any fast ones. I think there's a good argument that he is pulling some fast ones. I think I got most all of the material cataloged for the soft tissue stuff. And that will be a really neat compendium. I'm breaking it down into 3 different zones. Pre-dinosaur, pre-Mesozoic stuff of whatever type, then the big dinosaur material, and then material that's post-Cretaceous. And the differences as to how, as we get closer and closer to the modern era, there's get better and better amount of preservation. Duh. And the issues about what gets preserved. Will there be, there's chitins and osteocytes to some extent, and various molecules, melanin and others, and various decay products of certain things, heme, or the decay products of heme. But we're not talking blood vessels. We're not talking blood cells. In fact, some of the ones actually pull little fast ones where they'll show pictures from another paper that's different from the ones that they're dealing with, in order to try to beef up the arguments on there. And it'll be a little cautionary tale about the problems of taphonomy. And they've had to move their goalposts, by the way. They started out with thinking that really biomolecules couldn't possibly last more than 10,000 years. The science researchers were discovering that depending on the molecule, some things can last way longer than that. And they could reason out and work out the circumstances under which that happens. So the fun part comes when you see how they exaggerate the results. And when you read the original material and you discover in case after case after case after case that they have twisted what's been found to make it sound more impressive than it actually is. Brian Thomas is probably the most spectacular culprit in this area, because a huge block of the material in the soft tissue issue is just Brian Thomas posts, largely at Institute of Creation Research. And he's their go-to guy. The late Brian Enyart swore by him and had him on as guests quite a bit of time. And then that stuff filters through. There was even a sort of honest-to-gosh technical paper published in sort of a regular journal by Thomas and a co-author. And we'll be discussing the various material. They were very cagey in that article. They didn't make any young Earth creationist claims. They were very, very circumspect about a lot of the stuff, although they did slip in a reference to one of Armitage's creationist papers, but they condensed the way they described it so that it wouldn't be obvious that that was from the Creation Research Society, and to keep that down to a measure. But when you start looking at the individual papers and looking at the details of what's going on, it's not looking up like what they're expecting it to be. Okay, so we got about 14 minutes in here. I'm still not seeing a chat overlay, so if anybody is catching the show, I apologize for not saying hi, because I'm not seeing a chat window popping up. I have no idea. Admittedly, I'm starting a little early, and in fact, I will be ending rather early, but that will at least get us onto the scene. So we will hopefully have just as good of a connection next week at same time, 12:30-ish, 1 o'clock in the morning, on Sunday evening, Monday morning. time frame on the Pacific zone is when I'm talking about it. And later, of course, if you're farther past the crack of dawn on the East Coast or in the nice afternoon off in the wilds of Europe. See you all, gang. If you're in the heat wave, some of the other troubles that are happening in various spots around the world, and if you're in Ukraine or anywhere near it, take care. And we will see you all next week. Have fun all if you can, and if not, stay safe. Bye.